Here is Firac, you know, in the center of like the Shadow Flame bit, the highest level bit of the Zaralek Caverns. He is very much the main baddie of this whole patch, but he's not the boss of the raid. The boss of the raid is Sarkareth, with lots of kind of voidy stuff going on, and you know, Sarkareth corrupted by we think the whispers of Neltharion, if it is indeed Neltharion, and not like, you know, a void goddy or old goddy baddie for sure. But you know, very much like the theme of this patch is fire. It might be under the earth, but the theme is fire. And you know, Firac is very much the antagonist in the sense that he is now he has ignored the advice that Iridikron gave him, and that Viranoth is following the advice of like, these guys are badass. You know, that's the brilliant thing, as I was saying, about Iridikron, is he doesn't do that wow baddie thing of, you ridiculous, stupid, weak mortals, I will destroy you. You are nothing. You are the shit on my shoe. I will eat you all up because I'm huge and massive and badass. And then we beat them, right? Iridikron doesn't do that. Iridikron is very much like, these guys are nails. Like, you know, do not underestimate them. We're cool and we're hard, but we have to be really careful around these guys because they'll kill us. And that's why he is doing his plot. It's not like a 7D chess thing. It's not like the plot I was always going to do. He's taken a look at us and he's gone, right, we're going to have to switch up our tactics a little bit here because these guys are nails. And I like that. But Firac has not done that. You know, Firac is presented from the second you see him in the original cinematic, where they appear, and certainly in the cinematic leading up to 10.07, the Secrets of the Reach cinematic, where we see them in their visage forms. You know, he is like, fuck this. Let's just kill them. Let's just destroy everyone. Devour their souls. Let's do it. And that's what prompts him to be the main baddie in this patch, because Iridikron and Viranoth, we don't know what they're doing. But we know that Firac is all like, let's just kill everything. And so he is now, at this point in the story that we're looking at, he has bathed himself in Shadow Flame, so, which we know corrupts, well, aspect dragons, it does, certainly. It's having a really bad effect on, you know, it had a huge effect on Neltharion. It's having a big effect on the dragons, the Abyssian and Sibelian, as they came down in here as part of these quests. You know, it's having a really bad effect on Sibelian now. And we are looking at now, he is a fire elemental dragon, but he is a shadow flame dragon now. And it's kind of even more amazing that we won't be fighting him in the raid. That's still just kind of Sarkareth. But of course there is a mega dungeon coming in the summer in patch 10.1.5. And you've got to think, haven't you, that the mega dungeon will be where we fight Firac. Because I can't see a world where we do not beat Firac in this patch cycle. I can't see a situation at this stage where we don't deal with Firac as 10.1. I feel he's being set up so explicitly as like the main antagonist of particularly this patch, and there's no big kind of instance planned for 10.17. So I feel like we have got to fight him in the Mega Dungeon. Patch 10.15 Mega Dungeon is going to be a Shadow Flame Firac extravaganza. It could be a surprise 1 or 2 boss raid. It could be, yeah, but here's what I'm saying. So lots of people, when I mention this and I say, I think we'll be dealing with Firac in the Mega Dungeon, they say quite understandably, like Undefined is in my chat right now, that he's too big a deal to fight as a dungeon boss. And I agree with that. Because, you know, someone like Iridikron, look at him. Someone like Firac, look at this bad boy. What a waste it would be to fight him as a single boss in a mega dungeon, right? It would be a complete letdown. Lino agrees. Pretty much everyone in the chat would agree. Yeah, totally. And I agree with that. He's a raid boss for sure. But hear me out. There are 8 bosses in a mega dungeon, traditionally. What if Blizzard switch it up a bit? What if 4 of those boss fights, the final 4 boss fights, what if they are all Firac? What if those 4 boss fights are basically just like different phases of a raid boss fight? What if all 8 of those raid bosses, of those dungeon bosses, are Firac? Not likely to happen in a world where the dungeon has to work in Mythic Plus. Well, Blizz have already said in interviews leading up to this this expansion, and talking specifically about the dungeons in this expansion, that they do not make dungeons with Mythic Plus in mind. Otherwise, we wouldn't have Brackenhide Hollow. So, and think about it. If the final 4 bosses of the Mega Dungeon are Firac, I personally don't see why it would be an issue for Mythic Plus either, but assuming it was, that still gives you the first 4 bosses of that Mega Dungeon, which can be turned into a Mythic Plus. You still get 1 extra Mythic Plus dungeon out of that. But let's imagine this scenario where the final 4 bosses of the Mega Dungeon are just fighting Firac. Who's to say that you don't fight him for a bit and then he flies off, and then you follow him through trash, and then you fight him again in a different situation, and then he flies off, and then you fight your way through some trash, and then it's, like, what you're doing is you're just saying, like, it's kind of like a normal Mythic Plus dungeon, except every boss fight is against Firac. Why would that not be suited to Mythic Plus? And that's without even getting to the point where you say, well, if they've got a cool idea for a dungeon, then it doesn't work in Mythic Plus, in my opinion, should not be reason enough not to do the cool idea. Like, if they have a cool idea for a dungeon, they should do it. And if they sit down later and think it doesn't work in Mythic Plus, just don't make it a Mythic Plus dungeon. There are loads of ways you could do it. So what could you do? You could have like an ad fight. You could have a fight against his visage form. You could have a fight against like his final Shadow Flame dragon form, and like, I don't know, a fight against him and the old god that he has summoned, sort of thing. I think it would be a great way to mix it up, and I think it would be a worthy way of fighting someone like Firac in a dungeon. If you dedicate a huge, like, multiple boss fights in that dungeon to Firac, then suddenly it's not, in my opinion, an underwhelming way of fighting him in a dungeon. Because I agree, if he's a normal dungeon boss, and you just rock up and he's at the end of the dungeon and you just wipe him out, yeah, that is underwhelming. But if he's 4 fights in that dungeon, if you fight him and he turns into something else, and you fight him again, and he turns into something else, and you fight him again, and then he turns into something else, and you fight him again, that would be awesome. That'd be so cool. And that would feel like, in many ways, even more significant than a raid boss fight. You'd fight him more than you fight a raid boss. Yeah, this isn't even my final form. Exactly. To be honest, with the rotation of old dungeons as Mythic Plus, there is no need to make it one if it don't suit it. Exactly. And, in that situation, you could even make that final 4 bosses completely unsuited to Mythic Plus, and you'd still have the first half of that dungeon as a Mythic Plus dungeon if you wanted. So you'd still get a new Mythic Plus dungeon out of it. Or, you're right, or it could be like he is every other boss, for sure. I personally think it'd be more fun having it 4 fights in a row that are him, because I think it would make it more intense. But yeah, equally it could work like he's boss number 1, and then he runs away, and like you have to fight your way through him and another boss, like some mobs and another boss, and you fight him again, and then he goes deeper into the cavern. So he's not even running away from you, he's getting past you. Imagine it, right? So I don't like the idea of him running away. What if the whole setup of the dungeon is that you are there to stop him getting somewhere? So it's not like you're chasing out, it's like each time you fight him, he's getting past you. And then you run and you set up like another kind of barrier, and he gets there, and you fight him again. And then you have to fight your way through some mobs and stuff, and you set up another barrier, and he busts past you again. And because he's getting somewhere that you're trying to protect. I think that would be awesome. That'd be so cool. And yeah, absolutely, you'd fight the visage form at one point, you'd fight him doing one thing, you'd fight him doing another thing. It'd be great. He's not big enough to do like a Spine of Deathwing fight on, but you could definitely put the dragon riding fight in there if you wanted. That could definitely take we talked about the idea of a dragon riding fight, a raid boss. You could absolutely do that with Firac. That's just tower defense with extra steps. Well, I mean, it is in principle, but not in mechanics. It's not. No, it's not in mechanics wise. It's not tower defense at all. Yeah, it feels like that LK dungeon where you are running from Arthas. Yeah, totally. Or exactly. Or you could have it that you are running away from him. Absolutely, you could have that. He is chasing you somewhere, and you know, every now and then he catches up with you, and you have to fight him off a little bit more. Yeah, you could do that. You could make all 8 fights. You could make all 8 boss fights in that dungeon, Firac, of different versions. And so I guess the point I'm making, and the reason I've kind of brought that up as an idea, is because I think we definitely are like dealing with him in the dungeon. Clearly, the way he's being set up in this patch story, but then we don't fight him in the raid. Clearly, the mega dungeon is where we fight him. And I agree with you. I think a boss fight, a standard dungeon boss fight, even at the very end of a mega dungeon, would be underwhelming for him. I completely agree. But what if you swapped it up? How do we... I guess the question I'm answering here for myself is, how do you make a dungeon a fitting encounter with a huge character like Firac? And I think the way you do it is that you give him multiple boss fights in that dungeon. That's how I think you do it. Do you think Ice Girl Dragon looks at what happens with Firac in the Shadow Flame and starts questioning, are we really on the right side? It could be. That's a very strong theory that's going around at the moment, is that we kill Firac because he's nuts. Iridikron is obviously like the big bad of the expansion. Whether or not he's the final boss, he's definitely the big bad. But Viranoth, people are on the kind of the fence with Viranoth, and they're like, if there is one of the Primal Incarnates that would kind of, if not join us, but leave Iridikron, I don't think she would ever team up with us. I don't think she would become our ally, but she could become like a kind of an Ashara type thing where she's like, I'm just done, and then leave. And I think, I wouldn't be surprised to see that happen. I don't think we'd ever work with her. I think it'd be a thing where she goes off and does her own thing. And maybe that's, with the best will in the world, maybe that's a bit sexist. But it does seem that that's the way it's being set up. Having said that, does she realize she's on the wrong side? I mean, it's possible. And yeah, if it was going to be anyone, it would be Viranoth. But there's also that thing of how to convince me that I am on the wrong side. Kill my brother and my sister. I'm just trying to think. If that was me, if you were like, no, you don't understand, guys. We are not the baddies here. You guys are the baddies. How do we prove it to you? We'll kill your brother and sister. I'm not sure that would make me think I am the baddie. I think if you guys came up to me and you're like, no, Tally, you don't understand. You and Iridikron, you're the bad guys. Wait, we'll prove it to you. We'll kill your brother and your sister. Are you convinced now? It's like, no, I still think you're the baddies. Sadly, Firac is not big enough, but I would really like a dungeon where for the whole dungeon we fight in the back of the boss and then weaken him of the fight until we have done enough damage to fell this giant boss. Yeah, I think that would work, definitely. I think that will kind of happen, actually, as well. Yeah, so I don't know, man. I think that I agree with the general sentiment that people come up with whenever I say that I think we'll deal with Firac in the dungeon. I totally agree that like a dungeon boss is underwhelming for a character like Firac. However, I think there is a way that it doesn't have to be underwhelming. I think there's a way it could actually be incredibly epic and unique, and that is giving him multiple boss fights in that dungeon. I would probably do it so he was the final 4 boss fights, one after the other, just like boom, 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 because I just think that'd be really cool. Kind of treating it like different phases of a raid boss fight. But I completely agree. It could work equally well as him being like every other fight or something. Just so he has like a constant presence throughout that dungeon and you're fighting him loads and loads of times. But anyway, I think that would be a really, really good way of fighting Firac. If you've got to do it in a dungeon, I think giving him multiple boss fights in the dungeon, and I don't think it has to be, bad for Mythic Plus, but if it were, I don't think that's terrible. I'd rather, if you have a cool idea for a dungeon, and I think that is a cool idea for a dungeon, I would very much prefer that you do the cool idea and then decide later if it would make a good Mythic Plus dungeon. And if it doesn't, it doesn't, you know? So be it.